Welcome back to the Curious Decoder.
Where we unravel the universe one quantum quandary at a time.
Precisely. If you've journeyed with us before, you might recall our deep dives into the realm of qubits, or that mind-boggling concept of quantum entanglement.
And oh boy, if it's quantum, I've definitely got a quandary or two.
I'm the one they call Professor Enthusiasm.
And I'm Mia, your every person asker. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 7 of Decoding Quantum Computing.
This time we're tackling something that's got a lot of very smart people scratching their heads.
Yeah, the ethics of quantum computing.
What should you, dear listener, be pondering as this, let's face it, pretty mind-bending technology really starts to take off?
We're not just talking about your typical tech headaches here. This is about the future of things like, well, your privacy.
Your job security, even.
And maybe even global security, all thanks to the power of the qubit.
So, buckle up. Today we're asking the big, sometimes uncomfortable questions about quantum ethics and what we should be worrying about. Welcome to this deep dive into quantum ethics. Now you, dear listener, have probably heard about the incredible potential of quantum computers.
They promise to solve problems that are, well, frankly, impossible for our everyday computers to even touch.
Things like speeding up drug discovery, optimizing incredibly complex systems, maybe even cracking the secrets of the universe itself.
But as we've sort of learned exploring this wild quantum world with great power, right, there always seem to be a whole bunch of what-ifs that come along for the ride.
Today, we're going beyond simply geeking out about the technology itself.
We're going to be looking at the crucial ethical questions that inevitably pop up as quantum computing moves from the theoretical to the real world.
Think of this deep dive as your guide to the ethical landscape of quantum computing.
We'll unpack some of the big concerns, like how these quantum computers could completely shatter the internet security we rely on every day.
Putting your data at risk.
And the potential for, massive shifts in the job market.
Even the widening of global inequalities, driven by who has access to this technology and who doesn't.
We'll also delve into who gets to control this powerful tech.
And explore what steps we can take to make sure it benefits, everyone.
Not just a select, fortunate few.
Right. Our mission today is to equip you, the listener, with a clear picture of what to keep an eye on in this evolving quantum landscape. And most importantly, why it matters to you.
So to kick things off, could you break down exactly what this field of quantum ethics is all about? I mean, it's a phrase we're hearing more and more.
It's about anticipating the real-world consequences of all this quantum power.
Okay, real-world consequences.
The moral, social, even political ripples that might be caused by these, superpowered quantum computers. It's about being responsible.
Responsible, yeah.
Thinking about fairness. And honestly, maybe even avoiding a bit of quantum-powered chaos down the line.
So it's about looking ahead and thinking about the potential pitfalls.
Exactly. Unlike a lot of the ethical conversations we've had around traditional computing, things like data privacy or bias creeping into algorithms.
Yeah.
Quantum computing throws some entirely new ethical dilemmas onto the table.
New dilemmas, right?
We're talking about the very real possibility of breaking the encryption that pretty much underpins the entire internet as we know it.
The internet, okay, yeah.
Unlocking the ability to analyze colossal amounts of data in the blink of an eye, and potentially driving some really significant shifts in the global economy.
Wow, this sounds like it's a much bigger deal than just, making sure our online shopping recommendations get a little bit more accurate.
Oh, absolutely. This is about fundamental stuff. We're talking about privacy risks, the potential for economic disruption on a large scale, huge worries about security, who holds the keys to this incredible power, and the very basic question of who will actually get to use this technology.
It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. One of the worries I've heard about, and I'm sure many of our listeners have as well, is this idea of an encryption apocalypse.
This so-called encryption apocalypse.
Right now, so much of what we do online, things we think of as secure online banking, sending emails, even just browsing certain websites, relies on encryption methods like RSA and ECC.
These are sort of the bedrock of internet security, at least for now.
And they work because they're based on really, really tough math problems. Problems that would take even the fastest conventional computers we have today billions of years to solve.
Billions of years.
But quantum computers, they changed the game.
Right, because they work in a completely different way.
Thanks to some very clever algorithms. Shor's algorithm is the one you often hear about. They have the theoretical potential to crack these problems wide open, and not in billions of years, but potentially in a matter of hours.
Wow, hours.
Maybe even minutes. Of course, that's once these quantum computers are powerful enough.
So all that data we think is safely tucked away behind these digital walls, our bank details, health records, even those embarrassing emails we thought were long gone, could suddenly become vulnerable.
That's the fear. If the encryption methods we rely on crumble, the implications for personal privacy are, well, frankly, terrifying.
Terrifying, yeah.
We're talking about a very real risk of massive financial fraud, identity theft on an unprecedented scale, and even threats to national security if sensitive government information is suddenly exposed. It's like discovering that every digital lock protecting your life could be picked with a quantum hairpin.
That's not a comforting thought at all. But I have heard that researchers are working on ways to counter this threat. What's the latest on that front?
There's a huge global effort underway to develop something called post-quantum cryptography.
Post-quantum cryptography, got it.
These are essentially new encryption methods that are specifically designed to resist attacks from both classical computers and, crucially, these future quantum computers.
So they're future-proofing our security.
Exactly, and there's been some very promising progress. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, they're kind of the big players in setting technology standards, has even finalized some of these new post-quantum cryptography standards.
Okay, so there's a new, more robust shield being developed. That's reassuring. But I'm guessing it's not as simple as just installing a software update and calling it a day, right?
No, not at all. The transition to these new post-quantum cryptographic systems is going to be a long and complicated process.
A long process, okay.
It involves lots of rigorous testing of these new algorithms to make absolutely sure they're truly secure. Then there's the task of establishing international standards, so all our different systems can actually communicate with each other using these new methods.
Right, so everyone has to be on the same page using the same playbook.
And then, of course, there's the monumental task of actually upgrading all our existing digital infrastructure.
Oh, yeah. It's everything from personal devices to government systems.
Everything. We're talking about potentially decades to fully roll this out across the world.
Decades. So in that window of time, while we're making this transition, is all our current data just out there vulnerable, waiting to be cracked? It kind of feels like we're in a bit of a digital limbo.
It's a very valid concern. Any data that's encrypted today using algorithms that we know will be vulnerable to these future quantum computers could be targeted. It could be collected and stored by, well, let's just say those with less than noble intentions.
So they're banking on having access to these powerful quantum computers down the line.
Exactly. It's often called the harvest now, decrypt later threat.
Harvest now, decrypt later.
Uh-huh.
So they're essentially burying digital treasure today, knowing they'll have the quantum map to dig it up later. It's a long-term game, but a dangerous one.
Very much so. And this whole possibility really adds urgency to the need for a swift and well-coordinated transition to these more robust quantum-resistant security measures.
So the encryption issue is a big, immediate worry. But I've also read that quantum computing could potentially make surveillance, well, way more intense and effective. What are the ethical implications there?
That's another huge concern, absolutely. Think about this. Governments and large corporations are already gathering massive amounts of data on all of us. The challenge for them right now isn't really collecting the data.
It's making sense of it all.
Exactly. The real hurdle is analyzing those mountains of data in real time, extracting meaningful insights from it.
It's like having access to every book ever written, but not having the time or the manpower to actually read them all and understand what they say.
A perfect analogy. But quantum computers, with their incredible processing speed, could potentially wipe away that bottleneck. They could, theoretically, analyze huge data sets, things like our online activity, location data from our phones, even our purchasing habits, and construct incredibly detailed pictures of our lives.
It almost sounds like they could predict our future behavior.
That's not necessarily science fiction. The potential for predictive analysis is certainly there, which raises serious concerns.
It's a bit unnerving, to be honest.
Yeah.
It feels less like security and more like having a quantum-powered crystal ball peering into my life.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to set boundaries for privacy in a world like that?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that ethicists are grappling with right now. It raises huge questions about data ownership, consent, and how this kind of incredibly granular information could be used and potentially misused.
Misuse, yeah.
Imagine governments with access to surveillance tools that are essentially unbreakable.
Or companies able to target us with advertising that feels so specific, so accurate, that it's almost manipulative.
Exactly. Developing very clear ethical guidelines, robust legal frameworks, and strong oversight mechanisms will be absolutely crucial if we want to prevent those sorts of scenarios from becoming our reality.
It makes me think about how this technology could further exacerbate inequalities in the world. Quantum computing sounds incredibly expensive.
Expensive.
Who's realistically going to have access to this kind of power? It's hard to imagine it being available to just the average person.
You've hit on a really critical point, a concept that people are calling the quantum divide.
The quantum divide, okay.
It's very likely that, at least in the early stages, access to quantum computing technology, and crucially, the specialized knowledge needed to use it effectively, will be concentrated in the hands of wealthier nations and massive corporations.
Those who can afford it, basically.
Exactly, the ones that have the financial muscle to invest heavily in its development.
So we're talking about big tech giants, countries with massive research and development budgets, places like the US and China.
Right. They're going to have a considerable head start in this quantum race.
So could we see a situation where the technological gap between the haves and the have-nots just widens even further?
It's a real concern. Countries and organizations with significant quantum capabilities could potentially dominate in critical sectors like finance, healthcare, and national security.
They'll reap the rewards.
Exactly. While those without access could find themselves falling further behind, struggling to compete in a world increasingly shaped by quantum technology.
So we could have groundbreaking medical discoveries powered by quantum computing, but they might be completely out of reach for developing nations.
That's a sobering thought, and it highlights the pressing need for policies that promote more equitable access to this transformative technology.
Equitable access, right? So things like international collaboration on quantum research.
Yes, definitely. Supporting open source projects, both for software and maybe even hardware, making sure knowledge is shared more freely.
Investing in education and training programs in less developed countries.
Absolutely. We need to bridge this potential divide before it becomes too entrenched.
It's a bit alarming to think that, as it stands, the vast majority of quantum patents, something like 90%, are held by just 3 entities: the US, China, and the EU. It paints a stark picture of how concentrated this knowledge already is.
It's a stark reality.
It's also crucial to remember that quantum computing in itself isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool. And like any powerful tool, it can be used for incredible good, but it also has the potential to be used for harmful purposes.
Oh, absolutely. It's what we call a dual-use technology.
Dual use.
Meaning the very same fundamental capabilities that can be harnessed to do amazing things, well, they can also be applied in ways that could be very detrimental.
Like what? I mean, what kind of detrimental applications are we talking about here? Give me the stuff that's going to keep me up at night.
Well, take encryption breaking, for instance. We talked about how that could expose sensitive data.
Right, that was pretty unsettling.
But while that capability could be used by cybersecurity experts to, find vulnerabilities and make our systems stronger, it could also be used by those with malicious intentions.
For cyber warfare, espionage.
Exactly, or large-scale criminal activity. The same goes for quantum-powered artificial intelligence. It could be used to develop incredibly precise medical diagnostics, helping to save lives. But it could also be used to create, say, autonomous weapon systems with capabilities that are, well, frankly, terrifying.
Autonomous weapon systems, yeah, I've heard about those.
A real ethical minefield. And the work being done by agencies like DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in the US, on things like quantum sensors, those have the potential to dramatically improve the detection of submarines, for example.
So we're talking about a whole new level of military capability with all the ethical questions that come along with that.
It's a huge concern.
So how do we, as a global society, try to ensure that this incredible power isn't misused? It feels like we're walking a very fine line.
It's going to require a multifaceted approach. We're going to need vigilant oversight from regulatory bodies, really robust ethical standards embedded within research institutions and tech companies, and a continuous open dialogue between scientists, policymakers, ethicists, and importantly, the public.
It sounds like a huge collaborative effort is needed.
Absolutely. We need to be proactive. We need to think about the potential downsides, the worst-case scenarios, and develop preventative measures before these technologies are widely deployed. This is what's known as the precautionary principle.
The precautionary principle. Got it. Now let's shift gears a bit to something that might hit closer to home for a lot of people. Jobs. What about the impact on the workforce as quantum computing advances? I've read a lot about how this could potentially automate tasks that humans currently do.
That's a very real concern. It's one of the major socioeconomic implications we need to consider carefully.
It's the one that probably gets people a bit anxious.
As quantum algorithms become more sophisticated and practical, they could very well outperform classical computers in all sorts of fields that rely heavily on complex calculations.
Like what specifically?
Things like financial modeling, large-scale logistics planning, even some areas of scientific research and big data analysis.
So the question on everyone's mind is, could quantum computers eventually take my job? Or the jobs of people I know? It's a valid question.
It's the big one, isn't it? While I don't think we're looking at a sudden mass replacement of human workers across the board.
Right. Not everyone's getting a pink slip tomorrow.
It's very likely that we'll see a significant shift in the workforce.
Certain jobs will become more vulnerable.
Exactly. And new jobs will emerge. Jobs that require expertise in this quantum realm.
So quantum programmers, quantum...
Thinking now about robust retraining programs, strengthening social safety nets to support people whose jobs may become, well, redundant.
Redundant, right.
For example, McKinsey, the consulting firm, estimates that something like 30% of jobs in the logistics industry could be automated by as early as 2040.
That's a huge number.
And the World Economic Forum suggests that trillions of dollars in global GDP could be at risk if we don't manage this transition thoughtfully and ethically. And we also need to think about the uneven impact this could have on developing countries, which might lack the infrastructure to adapt quickly to such major economic shifts.
It's a reminder that this isn't just about the technology itself. It's about people and how we navigate these changes as a society. Now, this might sound a bit surprising, but I came across some information about the potential environmental impact of quantum computing. It wasn't something that immediately sprang to mind.
It's definitely an area that sometimes gets overlooked, but it's very important. Many of the leading designs for quantum computers, specifically those that use superconducting qubits.
Superconducting qubits.
These are one of the most promising types of qubits being developed. They need to be kept at extremely low temperatures to function properly. We're talking colder than outer space.
Colder than outer space.
It's pretty mind-boggling, but achieving and maintaining these incredibly low temperatures requires a lot of energy. You need specialized cooling systems running constantly, and that can lead to a pretty substantial carbon footprint.
So, ironically, we could be developing this technology in part to help address climate change. But in the process, we might actually be contributing to the problem.
It's a bit of a paradox for sure, and it's something that researchers are actively working to address. There's a lot of exciting research going on into alternative approaches, like photonic quantum computing.
Photonic, okay.
These systems could potentially operate at or close to room temperature. This would dramatically reduce the energy requirements. And it's worth remembering that quantum computing itself could actually become a powerful tool in the fight against climate change.
Right. It could be part of the solution.
It could help us develop more efficient renewable energy technologies, discover new materials for carbon capture, things like that.
So it's a complex picture. The overall environmental impact is something we'll need to watch very closely.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the ethics of quantum computing, it's clear that there's a lot to think about.
There's a lot to think about, yeah.
We've explored the potential risks to your privacy online, the possibility of major shifts in the job market, and the concerning prospect of this technology further dividing the world along economic lines.
We've also talked about the immense responsibility that comes with developing and deploying this technology. The responsibility that falls on scientists, on tech companies, on governments, to ensure that it's used for good, not for harm. And we've highlighted some of those potential harms, from the erosion of privacy to the development of more powerful weapons.
And we even touched on the often overlooked environmental impact, which is a whole other layer of ethical considerations to ponder.
It's a lot to digest, that's for sure. It might feel overwhelming, but the positive side is that these aren't just abstract issues being debated in ivory towers. People are grappling with these questions right now.
So there's a growing awareness of the challenges.
There are initiatives springing up all over the world to develop ethical frameworks specifically for quantum technologies. There are open source projects trying to democratize access to these tools and the knowledge to use them. And there are ongoing conversations at international levels about responsible development and deployment.
It sounds like there's a real global effort to get ahead of these issues.
Absolutely. And organizations like the Quantum Ethics Project, for example, are doing some really important work in this area. There are also groups like the IEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, who are working on developing standards and guidelines for ethical quantum computing. So it's not all doom and gloom.
That's reassuring.
Yeah,
But ultimately, it's going to take all of us to shape this future responsibly.
it's going to take all of us, that's for sure.
So we urge you, dear listener, to engage in this conversation. Start asking yourself some tough questions.
Tough questions, okay.
How do we balance the immense potential of quantum computing with our fundamental rights to privacy and security in this rapidly evolving digital world?
Fundamental rights, right?
What responsibilities do tech companies and governments have in steering this quantum future in a direction that benefits all of humanity? And perhaps most importantly, how do we ensure that the benefits of this incredibly powerful technology are shared equitably, not just hoarded by a privileged few?
Those are the real questions we all need to be wrestling with.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. If the power to break any digital lock, to analyze unimaginable amounts of data becomes, well, commonplace, if that truly becomes our reality, what fundamental assumptions about trust and security in our society will need to be completely reevaluated?
Wow, that's a big question.
And what role will you, dear listener, play in shaping those new societal norms? It's something to ponder.
Food for thought, for sure.
That's all the time we have for this deep dive into the fascinating, complex, and let's face it, sometimes a bit unnerving world of quantum ethics.
We hope you found it insightful.
Join us next time as we continue to explore and decode the quantum realm right here on the Curious Decoder.
And if you want to delve deeper into any of the topics we've discussed today, we've got a whole bunch of resources and further reading suggestions in our show notes. Be sure to check those out.
And as always, keep those questions coming. Keep exploring.
Keep decoding the universe.
One quantum mystery at a time.